Hi everybody, I am Dr. David Perrodin. Welcome to the Week 3 Fireside Chat for Educational Leadership 655, Pupil Services and Nondiscrimination, Viterbo University. It is a brisk 55 degrees down here in the North Star recording studio. But let's warm things up with this Week 3 Fireside Chat. Week 3 beginning Monday, January 26th, ending Sunday, February 1st, 2020. I want to clarify your post to the discussion threads. So every week there will be two discussion questions I will post. You'll respond to each question with about a half-page response. In addition to those discussion questions, you need to make 8 other posts. Those posts can be responses to your classmates, responses to things that I've posted in class, the weekly summary. But when the week is done, so Thursday, your discussion posts would be done. Those would be the 2 posts. And then when we get to Sunday night, you should have a total of 8 additional posts which have been made. And those 8 additional posts, that's like 3 to 5 sentences for each post. So in a whole week, right, we have 2 discussion questions that you're answering, then 8 additional posts. So I guess 10 posts in total. Many of you post more than that, which is great. But just so we clarify that, it's also on the bottom of page 6 in the syllabus. I will be entering grades once we get through week 2. So I'll post in the introduction, section. You'll see it, announcements, and it'll say, hey, I've entered the grades. Go in and check them. So if I have any questions from what you're doing, if I notice anything that kind of looks out of the ordinary, I'll contact you and say, hey, maybe you're not making the number of discussion, responses that you have to. Your total, posts haven't been hitting 10 or whatever, but I'll let you know. Okay. So week two in review. All right. Discussion question 1, Jeffy and Susie. So that's really all about process. That question gets down to making sure that you're notifying the building, the site-based management, the principal, letting the principal know, because probably what's happened is, that parent is called, the principal has left a message on your phone, maybe the superintendent, the counselor, everywhere. So we want to make sure that we are having building level matters first addressed and investigated at a building level. Also, if there is a claim of bullying, okay, so alleged act of bullying, we have to make sure that we investigate that, because we have school policies, we have state policies, sometimes local ordinances, depending upon where this might have happened, if it was in the school environment or in out of a school environment. So we have to make sure that we are investigating claims of bullying. Now, if a few of you had indicated, what if the parent, hadn't filled out a bullying report form? So that might be your first step, is saying you need to go and fill out the form. Maybe it's online, maybe it's in the handbook, whatever. But we need to be careful with that doesn't become a barrier. Once we know of something, we need to investigate, right? So the parent has communicated that she perceives this as an act of bullying. So ideally, that information would come into our bullying reporting form. It's like really low humidity down here right now because it's so cold. But yeah, hopefully that information would come in. But otherwise, you would need to go through that information, with her. Take it from the parent, put it into your form. I mean, imagine if it was a parent with an intellectual disability or an English language learner. To make that parent complete the form becomes a discriminatory process, right? So we need to make sure that we aren't holding people up with forms. I also talked about exempting students with disabilities, and I had the article about that. Also the podcast with James Sibley. So a few of you indicated, that practice was happening in your districts. Just a reminder that ADA always comes before or trumps an IEP, and we cannot exempt students with disabilities from safety instruction. So to become informed of things like how well does staff understand IEPs? So this was the second discussion question. IEP at a glance, what are you doing to make sure that staff know a student has an IEP, has accommodations? So what people do often is they'll do a survey and they'll just send it out to staff. Are you aware of the students' IEPs, their case managers, if you have any questions, things like that. I'm saying give surveys a break and just go and sample with some teachers, ask them, like as the student services director, hey, which students have IEPs that you serve? Where are the IEPs? Like, are they in a folder? Are they online? Do you log in to see them? What are the accommodations? How often do you speak with the case manager? How do you know if there's changes in the IEP? Things like that. That's all qualitative. Like, that's discussion based. That's going to be a lot more helpful to finding if there's problems in the systems with fidelity of implementation of IEPs. In the book School of Errors, which you have for this class, read pages 74 to 76 to understand why we want to limit the use of surveys to gather data. There's a place for those, but especially when we're trying to understand, for example, how effective our IEP implementation is across the board, it's best to go and to do a qualitative sample, talk to people about that. You can also use that process, right? If you're talking to people about how they're becoming informed of IEP, regular education teachers, for example, you can write about that, your 5-year non-discrimination report due to the DPI. It's something you should put in a monitoring report to the board and saying, we want to make sure that we have fidelity in this process, that our students are receiving the services. We don't have any barriers which are interfering with services or some passive discrimination happening. So this is what we're doing. I kind of argue that, the IEP is a tool of passive discrimination until its jargonese is deciphered to staff and the parents. When we send out the parent rights brochure, I've never met a parent who looks at that and it just makes sense, right? I mean, it's a legal requirement that we send that out. The next step is that we take it and we explain that, as case managers to the parent, here's what it means. And it's the same thing, I think we need to be very clear with our teaching staff because, again, the induction process, we have new staff coming into our systems all the time. Some of you wrote too about, hey, we have a lot of emergency licensed staff and they don't have a lot of experience even in education. So we want to make sure that especially IEPs, that we're breaking down the jargon, we're breaking down exactly who's responsible for what parts of an IEP, where it overlaps. And because, again, it kind of has a feeling of it can be a document that can discriminate because it's written at such a high register. Week 3 preview. All right. Networking and sharing services. So you're going to read the article about the Sauk County Directors. I was a part of that. One of the founding members, and that was, roughly 10 years ago. There's an article about shared services, very similar to that. And that article's from 2 years ago. But we worked to collaborate, to share different areas for student services. And what we felt this would accomplish is, one, our staff would be more highly trained. We would have access to more resources, whether that be devices, equipment that we shared, for example, augmentative devices that we shared across districts, for also sharing staff. If a staff member, for example, a speech language pathologist who also was fluent in Spanish, was able to do a handful of evaluations in a neighboring district where students had a primary language of Spanish. So, but this is to make sure that we have efficient services and we are not isolating our districts. We're working together, collaborating with all of our resources. So what we did also is we did staff professional development, whether it be on suicide prevention, serving homeless students, bullying, students with disabilities, cognitive disabilities. We worked together. So all of the districts would tend to go to the same professional development, or we would bring in people to do professional development, and we might all come to one district site to do that. So my staff are working with staff from a neighboring district and a neighboring district as they collaborate and go through this professional development. We also put on our own workshops. We got our nurses together. We did a workshop on allergy awareness. So we had our nurses and our cooks together, Pupil Services, people that worked in the kitchen. It was awesome, right? It was awesome. We had students with allergies attend it, and they were presenting their perspectives, especially high school students who were advocating. We had high school students from one of the schools in the alternative program did a presentation on hand washing, and they were using a black light to show how much gets off your hands in like 30 seconds versus a minute, and singing the alphabet song. But it was awesome. So as you look at this week's Fireside Chat, which is the Sauk County article, okay, think about the Memorandum of Understanding that has been talked about in this class. We have the one from Edgerton that was shared. So Dannielle, thank you for that. But, we worked on a lot of memorandums of understanding, worked with superintendents, worked between directors. So we could share services back and forth. We could track if certain, specialized augmentative devices went from one district to another to meet needs and then came back. It was kind of like a CISA model, like a microcosm of that somewhat, but it was really a special thing. Now, we also had with this Memorandum of Understanding, which is so important, if anything happened of a crisis situation in one of our districts, for example, a student had completed suicide or a staff member, student, adult student was killed in a car accident, we could immediately get the resources of the districts around us. The people that we had trained with in the trainings right next to them, elbow to elbow, would be coming over to our district to support us, or we would be sending our staff over to that district to give support. That's one of the things that you don't think about until you need it, until you get that call from a neighboring district in the morning and saying, this happened and we need your help. And it seems like that would be an immediate response. You'd be able to, send some counselors over, school psychologists, whatever. You'd be able to do that. But it never plays out as smoothly as that if you haven't put together a memorandum of understanding. Because people are like, well, if I leave, then how do we cancel classes? How do I get paid for mileage? Not that people break all of this down, but there are these things that come into play. How do we count this day? We worked it out as memorandum of understanding. It would always be a paid day through the district. We counted as professional development ultimately when we jotted it down, because they were learning how to support people in crisis, and they would bring those skills back to the district. But these are all things that you want to work out ahead of time with some of your neighboring districts. I'm really a strong advocate for your, in regional proximity, not your demographics, but your geographics, who's close by you, to partner up with those districts and to share things, whether it be policies, whether it be things like going through here, your release of information form. So that's kind of consistent across all of your districts. These are also the people to me that were my member checks. I could go to them and say, hey, I'm trying to implement whatever. Back then it was response to intervention. What do you think about this? And we're kind of all going through similar things. And the member checks are the people who are going to be completely honest with you. And they'll say, I think you're right on, or no, I think you're reading this wrong. And you need those as a director. You need that. Let's talk about this week's SWOT assignment: strength, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. What I want for that is bullet points. Okay, so not long sentences, paragraphs. So strengths, 8 strengths. Weaknesses, 8 weaknesses, 8 opportunities, 8 threats. So 32 bullet points in total. And then also your stakeholders, right? Which is going to be superintendent, school board, local realtors, businesses, parents, all of that. So probably gave you quite a few of them right there. So this is actually a terrific thing to do every year as a student services director. Okay. It helps to objectify something which is kind of subjective. What are our strengths? What are our weaknesses? If you talk about it, but if you actually put down like 8, 8, 8, 8, now you've got something that is objective, and you can prioritize that, right? You can identify, maybe of our opportunities, here are 2 opportunities that we want to focus on this year, and we want to try to turn these opportunities into strengths. Okay, so that's what you do with the SWOT analysis. And with threats, you just try to mitigate your threats. A threat might be, hey, we've got declining enrollment. Okay, a threat is we have a lot of turnover. So okay, you're going to address that threat in making sure that you have a robust induction process. So again, your big focus with your SWOT is to figure out your opportunities, because that's where you can put your energy to move your opportunities into strengths. It's great to do that with pupil services programs, whether it be, hey, our old school, whether we're doing, or how do we manage allergies? We can do a SWOT analysis for that. How, efficient our IEPs, let's do a SWOT analysis on that. Bullying and harassment, education, PBIS, all of those types of things. Community health needs assessment, or the China. I just helped a consortium of districts in northern Wisconsin work with their local medical providers as those medical providers update their community health needs assessment. So this became law like 10 years ago, I think. And actually, a lot of people don't know about it, but the community health needs assessment means all medical providers across the entire United States. So if you type in your district's name or the city where your district is at, plus, in quotes, community health needs assessment, it'll come up, the medical providers in your area and this community health needs assessment. And it should address students. It should address all populations. And many times you'll see, especially like in La Crosse area, Adams Friendship, you'll see that school members, counselors, principals are on that advisory for that community health needs assessment. This is something you want to know about. It's something you want to be a part of as a special education director. This is very powerful in mental health services, bridging services over to your school to know what's happening also at a county level. A lot of the weight of the China is put on the medical provider. So this is one of those rare times when you get to participate in something as a school leader and not have it all fall back on you to complete. So this is very important. I've known districts who, because of their partnerships in developing the community health needs assessment, have medical providers coming on site to do mental health screenings, to do allergy trainings, to help them provide EpiPens for their staff, or for their schools. So look at the community health needs assessment. This is very, very valuable, something you want to be very aware of, be active as a director. Have the Marcus Buckingham video, play to your strengths. That complements the SWOT, right? We want to make sure that we identify our strengths and that we have to keep playing to our strengths. If we're really good at something as a district, we're really good with transition or whatever it is, we can't siphon energy from that to work on other areas. We have to make sure that we keep the things that are kind of our hallmark characteristics, we keep those strong. Also, when we think about student IEPs, and it's Marcus Buckingham video, play to your strengths, we have to also look at a student's complete set of assets, right? If we have a 10th grader and we're still working in the IEP on spelling, maybe that's not where we want to put our energy, because, what device doesn't have spell check today? Is it really that important? Versus, the student is really strong, with verbal communication. So, maybe we want to emphasize, those skills or whatever it is, but this is, I think we have to realize, we get to a point where we have to make sure that we do not erode our strengths or erode a student's strengths, but, through neglect to bring up weakness areas. That has to be a very careful balance, especially as students get older. Week 3, discussion question 1. The services that you receive from your CISA, keep that pupil services themed. So if you get driver's ed from your CISA, I don't have to note that, right?
This is important though. Get that CISA contract. Get it from your administrator. I do this in the superintendent class. Every time people look at that, they're like, I didn't know I was getting this service or this service. So if, there are services on there, you're getting so much, either special ed leadership, autism, deaf and hard of hearing, low prevalence services are where CISA specializes in. It's going to depend on the size of your district, right? If you're a smaller district, probably getting more services than a larger district. But be familiar with that. The other part is advocate for your needs, right? Hey, we need mental health training for staff. We need more nonviolent training, more training on functional behavioral assessments, behavior intervention plans. It's not part of our CISA menu. Then, meet with your neighboring districts, go down or wherever it is, go to your CISA and say to your RSN director, your director of special education at CISA, this is what we see in our districts. This is what's manifesting. Your menu of services meet some of our needs, but not all of our needs. So we are urging you to do, for example, more mental health services. For example, to do trainings on functional behavioral assessment, maybe to have someone come in and do an FBA on a student. These are services that we need. And when I was a director, we did that with CISA 2. We went down as a group, met with CISA 2, and it was great. I mean, it was a little bit of an awkward meeting, right? Because we're saying we want these things. Like if we're going to continue to contract at this level with you, the services that you provide us need to include these things in the tiers. And there were also some things that we didn't need. So that's the part is, as a director, you want to make sure that matches up. And, those are always good relationships with the CISAs, but the CISAs need to be informed by you so they can meet your needs. So you can, present to them. I'm seeing a lot of this, or as a consortium, a few districts, that are served by the CISA, we're seeing this. It's really a terrific thing to do. Week 3 discussion question 2, the countywide consortium, which I've talked about, if you did something like that, what do you think would be the benefits? What might be the drawbacks? What are some things that you'd share in that? I think professional development is huge, where you can get people together and share that, especially bringing people into your district or even putting things on organically within your district. Like I said, the allergy summit, which was kind of just a few districts came together and presented practices on here's how we do it in this district, in this district, in this district, and it just kind of standardized itself out. It's really a terrific thing. Actually, we invited the DPI to that. They sent down the nurse consultant. She thought it was really cool. So also, if you're doing that countywide consortium, you can start to standardize some of your practices a little bit. So, for example, if you have your release of information form standardized between districts that are close to each other, that helps out sometimes because those district students are kind of moving in and out. Even if you standardize your IEPs, how they're done, it can just help because most of the students that moved into my district were always from the districts right around me. And we just started to do things in a more similar way. So then when students went from my district to another district, next door, it wasn't much of a shock for them or the parents either with, new paperwork, new forms, new processes, because we were kind of already calibrated to each other. So that was really a good thing. I think decreased the learning curve, for parents and for students and definitely promoted continuity of service. All right. I'm going as fast as I can. Week 2 student shout outs. Here we go. Christopher, you shared the learning plan quick reference plan. All right. I just used plan twice. It has a graphic organizer type appeal to it. It's really well done. You did a terrific job. I've never seen anything like that. And the fact that you talk about learning plans and also put in the allergy plans with that, it's a perfect way to help people become aware. Hey, there's more out there that I need to look into to learn about. The student, again, has medical, going on, learning plan. It's really well done. I can see why your staff gave you great feedback on it. So thanks for sharing that with everybody. All right, Angie, for week 2 discussion question 2, you noted that special education teachers in your district were working under emergency licenses and they had a limited teaching background. So yes, yeah, we see more and more and more of this. We need to have robust induction and onboarding processes. Really, it's where I spend half the time as a consultant, is just helping people with onboarding. How do we do onboarding when people come in, mid-year, or they don't have much or no experience in education? So we want to make sure that we have that process down, that we have mentors, that we are recording our professional development, that we are, asking people, what do you need? What do you understand? What don't you understand? A qualitative approach. So let me tell you a story. In 2018, in this class, a student was a first-year special education director. And when we got to week 2 and we started to talk about allergy management, she contacted me and she said, yeah, I just checked with my district and I'm in charge of allergies. And it was a pretty big district. And she said, nobody said this to me. It was her first year in the job as a special education director. And yeah, I mean, I never had it in a class when I was a director, and it was something I had to learn when I got to a district, because when I started in a CISA, we didn't do anything with allergies at a CISA level. That was all done at a district level. So this is something where we want to make sure that we have onboarding, and onboarding for, staff at whatever level it is. And also when you start somewhere, try to observe what's happening for the onboarding process, or ask the questions if you're interviewing somewhere. Tell me about the onboarding questions. Who's going to, help me to learn how things are done around here? Because, right, there are 421 districts in Wisconsin. Every district does things differently. So thanks, Angie. For week 2, thoughts and reflection, Tim wrote about IEP case managers using the IEP accommodations section to exempt some students with disabilities from safety drills. And thankfully, that practice was ending with new administration. So, the reason I wrote the article, the reason I had the podcast with James Sibley is because this happens. And it happens because teachers, case managers don't know that the IEP can't do this, right? Because the IEP can do a lot of things. We can do test accommodations. So much can happen, placement, abbreviated school days. IEP has a lot of power. And I think people just assume, right? Largely, this isn't where it's out of an unwillingness to do it. It's though, people saying a few things. One is, I think, these drills are too much for the student. They're bringing trauma, they're dysregulating. And if that's the case, that's probably happening to many more people than just that student. So we want to recalibrate the drills. This is huge though. We cannot allow this to happen. One is, it's not a legal practice. No matter what anybody tells you, it is not a legal practice. And the second part is, it's simply not ethical. Again, what if a student were to encounter this in any other environment at any other point in time? Fire drill, intruder situation, being, observing, a threat, or feeling a sense of, suicidal ideation or something like that. And we haven't worked with a student on appropriate recognition of these characteristics, and then how to report these, or how to respond if there's, fire alarm, how to respond during nonlinear, chaotic things, a blackout, for example. How do we do that? Or what if the student's in a car accident? We're going to get into it later in class, but there's something called REMS TA. It's Readiness Emergency Management. And they have free school trainings where they come in and they work with kids. Like, hey, if you're, like high school kids, if you're in an accident, a vehicle accident, or if you see an accident, here's what to do. But again, we don't really do that, right? We don't do that stuff. Tim, now an IEP, well, first off, I think that, like, the DPI should do, or the Fed's Department of Ed should do a dear colleague letter. Dear colleague, knock it off. Don't do this anymore. We need to involve all students in safety instruction. fire drills, tornado, all of the drills that their peers, their non-disabled peers are getting, they need to also receive. We can use the IEP to help this happen. So IEP objectives, we could have a goal for safety. Objectives could be a student will create a social story about what to do during an intruder drill. Objective B, during a role play activity, a student will identify bullying or harassment behavior, on 4 out of 5, whatever. And C, I put these together, okay? And C, student will demonstrate how to make a safety report to an adult by using the school's reporting system, right? We have all these crazy apps and all these systems where it's like, how do we do this? And it's like, I have no idea, right? So we want a student to actually demonstrate how to do that. So, and as we go through this, I just want to branch off. I had an interview for my podcast with Morgan Ballas. So it is the one that's up right now, episode 117. Morgan is a campus security expert in San Diego. And in his work as a school safety consultant, he said the most prevalent answer he gets when asking teachers, just teachers, hey, what would you do if there was a fire here? The number one answer that teachers give is, I would find an administrator. I'd find a principal. The number one answer is not, I'll pull the alarm, and I'll get people out of here. So, that kind of thinking goes down into how we are addressing our thought processes with students with disabilities, students without disabilities when it comes to safety. So just important to think of. If you want to, look into a deeper case study, check out Our Lady of Angels Fire, 1958. It was in Chicago. It was at a private school, and the teacher knew that there was a fire. There was smoke, but then was trying to find the school, the head of the school, to make a determination whether or not they could pull the alarm and evacuate the building. So minutes were lost. Over 90 lives were lost. For week 2, discussion question 2, Ryan wrote, going into next school year, I'd like to see all the teachers do IEPs at a glance for homeroom teachers and specialists. To accomplish this, I will set up a dedicated time for homeroom teachers and specialists to meet with case managers to review the IEPs at a glance. Yes. All right. So you are taking this macro perspective on things, and you're saying, the root cause of what's happening, maybe if teachers aren't following the IEP, if they're not fully versed in it, we're not giving them time to sit down to have a discussion, case managers, specialists, homeroom teachers on the IEPs. So everybody's starting from the same point, inter-rater reliability. They know which student have IEPs, what's in the IEPs, right? So you are prioritizing that, and kudos. Thank you for doing that. All right, I'm on the last page. For week 1, discussion question 1, Jaimie wrote, I would also be returning her call. Remember, this is the parent who's very upset, who leaves the full message. I would return her call before 9 a.m. as she had requested. The purpose of this call be to hear her concerns. Essentially, she would repeat what she shared in the message, or she could say things differently. At this point, I would want to share with her. I'll be in contact with her after reaching out to members of the student services team, administrators, to make sure this has been handled appropriately. Yes, 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 right? We want to give that call back, because if we don't give a call back, that parent is thinking, oh, I'm being ignored. And then the calls will continue to you or the administrators or, teachers, and they'll just keep going on. But that call back is to say, I want to clarify the message that you left, because it's like a 90-minute or 90-second message, right? And then beep, gone. So you want to say, here are the points that you communicate. I want to make sure that I'm hearing you accurately, that I'm thorough when I start to gather information. And then basically saying, I will be in contact with you, later today. And ideally before that, the building administrator will contact the parent. And this will go back to building level management to have this matter resolved. And then you would do kind of a, touch base at the end of the day and saying, I'm aware that the principal called you, principal is gathering more information and shared the timeline. But yeah, you put together a really good plan for that. Again, that is just a question to get at process, and also to make sure that when we have the term bullying, come up, and understanding the context the parent uses it, it might move us into our policy where we now are investigating bullying. So we want to be aware of that. In response to week 2 discussion question 2, Nancy wrote, IEP teams spend a good deal of time planning scaffolds and support for students, but case managers and administrators do not think about how to do this for staff nearly enough. Yeah, I mean, case managers and administrators, one, we need to look at the big schedule, right? We need to look at common planning time, how much time people have together to go through the curriculum, how the curriculum is being modified, whose role is it to modify the curriculum. It should be, the case manager and the regular education classroom teacher. Also, I mean, do we have opportunities for co-teaching, right? Systemic. I mean, if we have more co-teaching, we're going to have a more balanced sharing of the scaffolds and supports for all students. So sometimes it's these huge fundamental shifts which need to take place. I mean, right now you can answer the question of how much co-teaching happens in your district. I mean, that was all the rage a few years ago. Co-teaching probably doesn't happen a lot, with a special education teacher and a regular education teacher. I don't even like to use those two terms because I just kind of like to use teacher, right? I mean, all students are regular education students. Some students also have disabilities and receive special education. So, but how much do we do co-teaching? And then how much do we do things like looping? So if a student is in first grade, the student has the same teacher for second grade or maybe also third grade. Those are really popular things like 20 years ago. We just don't hear a lot about. Some of those practices were very positive for inclusion, very positive for non-discrimination of students with disabilities. For week 2, thoughts and reflections, Jessica asked, are we using FAPE in the same way for both IDEA and McKinney-Vento? And my response to that is FAPE applies to all students. So free and appropriate public education with the exception of a student without a disability who has been expelled from a district. So if a student does not have a disability, they are expelled. They're not entitled to receive FAPE from the district, or if there was a situation they became homeless, anytime they still would not be eligible to receive services from the district if they were under an expulsion order. Now, most districts will continue to provide services to a student. But there were some other questions about McKinney-Vento, and I think an important point is, if a student becomes homeless, there might be a situation where you're transporting that student, an hour or an hour and a half one way, to their previous school. And when I was a director, sometimes those were tough discussions with my business manager, my director of transportation, just from logistics, because they'd be like, who are we going to get to do this? Like, we can put an ad out there, but we're not sure anyone's going to do it. And then, what does this mean for the student if they're in a vehicle 3 hours a day? Or what if it's a student with, behavioral needs, and, they transporting for that long isn't going to be good. I mean, they might be overwhelmed, Sensory might have a meltdown. I mean, these are all things we have to work through, right? There are no shortcuts in McKinney-Vento. There's nothing in the DPI or in the feds that say, if a student is transported more than 90 miles one way or 90 minutes one way, then the district can decide to, provide services closer. That doesn't exist. So we just have to understand, these are usually short-term situations, and the purpose of it is to maintain stability in the child's life. But it is something as a director, you need to be very clear with your, business manager, very, clear with transportation that it's a non-negotiable. You have to do it. We have to find a way to make it happen. All right. And wrapping up for week 2 discussion question 1, Dannielle, you wrote, if the parent had not made any reports that the school is aware of, so we're going back to that discussion question of the angry parent leaving the full message, I would call the parent back and let them know the first steps are filing a complaint, and I'd let them know the process to do that. So again, if the parent says, I'm not going to fill out the form, okay, then the question is, what would you do? could you just end it right there because the parent didn't fill out the bullying form? And the answer would be no, you couldn't do that. It wouldn't be legally defensible to do that. The other part is you want to make sure that your bullying form or harassment form, whatever that a parent is filling out, or an adult student is filling out, you want to make sure the investigation doesn't get pushed into the report that they're filling out. So here's what I mean. I give an example of this on page 162 in your book, School of Errors. Okay. Look at 162, the example of the fire alarm. You should not, expect a parent to fill out like a 3-page form of their child experiencing an alleged act of bullying, being the recipient of that, where it's saying, who else was involved? Where was it? What was the time of day? All those are investigation questions. Okay. Those are the questions that the administrator or whoever is assigned to investigate is going to investigate. So again, going back to page 162, think about it this way. If you had, if you're in a hallway, right, and you see smoke and you pull a fire alarm, all right, then imagine instead of like you pull a fire alarm, you get out of there, right? If you had a different set of conditions now, once you pull it, you have to stand there, and there's a voice comes over an intercom and says, "Hey, you just pulled the fire alarm. Can you confirm that you pulled it?" "Yeah, I did." "Okay. What do you see around you?" "I don't know. I see smoke." "Okay. What color is the smoke?" "Looks white, maybe kind of yellow." "Does it smell like it's electrical?" "Yeah, I guess so." And well, can you see through it? Like, could you say like it's like a light fog and it's like, "No, I don't have time for this. I'm getting hot. My feet are on fire. Like, we can't do this." So, but we do that type of thing. It's a passive bias where we try to gather more information up front from the parents and from the students by through the form, but then it becomes a barrier because people are like, "I'm not going to complete this. This is too much," right? It's too much. So it's a passive barrier, and it's mostly a passive barrier for, students who have intellectual, disabilities, reading comprehension, language disabilities. If they're trying to complete these, parents who might have, some intellectual challenges, parents who are not native English speakers. So it's a really important step. We did it with the handbook. Last week we looked at our handbooks, and a lot of you said, "Yeah, our handbooks are testing out at 12th grade level plus." But take a look at your reporting form. You're not going to copy and paste it into the readability thing, but if you have a multi-page reporting form for bullying and harassment, ask yourself the honest question of, is this bullying form actually representing part of the investigation? I mean, are we pushing this on to the parent when this should be more of a fire alarm? That the parent it's a very succinct, statement, perception from the parent, and then the investigation unfolds, from the administrator, whoever is assigned to that. So, all right. I hope that you listen to these entire fireside chats. I do all of the notes ahead of time, so I can be as fluid and succinct as possible during these, but I also want to be thorough. And I appreciate your feedback once we get into the weekly feedback section. So again, make sure you're doing your post, 1 for each discussion questions, 2, an 8 additional post for right here, 8 additional posts during the week. So I guess 10 posts total, right? Including your 2 for the discussion threads. And yeah, just continue to be active posters in class. And I'm having a great time. You're doing a terrific job. Continue to share resources. It just makes all of us, richer in our experience. So, and stay warm, everybody. It's literally 55 degrees down here. Yes, So that's too cold. If it gets any colder, I see steam when I'm talking, right? It's gonna be crazy. So, all right, thanks everybody.